Well, hello there. I listen to a lot of different forms of music, but I'm still from the rock and roll era, I suppose you could say. I can appreciate sometimes an upbeat rock and roll riff with vintage flair. So that's why it's only normal for me to check out the movie Elvis from 2022. And I had a chance to see that in the movie theater because I actually work in a movie theater. But I didn't go to see that one, even though I could have seen it for free. And I guess partly it's because it's a long movie and all that sort of thing. I don't necessarily want to invest that much time into seeing a movie in the theater unless I think it'll be worth it. So when it comes to this movie, I thought that it was a mixed bag. It's directed by Baz Luhrmann. It's a 2022 biographical drama, as I'm sure you would have guessed, and it's less of a history lesson and more of a high voltage rock opera of sorts. And it has points of it that are both good and bad, so let's dive in. The setup is pretty straightforward. Elvis isn't your standard cradle to grave biopic. It's directed by Baz Luhrmann, as I said, and he's the guy behind Moulin Rouge and Australia. And this film is flashy, fast, and filtered through the warped lens of one Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks. And Austin Butler stars as Elvis Presley, and honestly, he crushes it for the most part. I was fully expecting to end up criticizing his performance and all that, but no, I think he actually did a pretty admirable job. And he came across seeming Elvis like enough. He didn't seem like a bad impersonator or something like that. So he doesn't just play Elvis, he, for some people, sort of becomes him. Now, obviously, there's some people who will watch this movie and they'll be like, no, I didn't see the transformation at all. And they'll be all cynical and whatnot. But I think he comes pretty close, actually. He's got some of the swagger, the voice, the stage presence, all of that. So I can't really trash talk his performance, at least as far as I'm concerned. Other people can try to hop on some bandwagon and do that, but I thought he did a good job. In fact, Butler even did much of his own singing in the early parts of the film, from what I understand, which adds another layer of authenticity to the movie. And, it's a movie that's otherwise drenched in style over strict fact. And it's a bit of a carnival like experience, to be honest. And I guess I'll get into the most controversial aspect of the movie, which is Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks. As I said, he's not your usual narrator. He's manipulative, unreliable, and kind of revels in it. Luhrmann himself said Parker is like a modern figure who'd be proud to admit, I guess you call them lies. So that's the twist here. We're not just watching Elvis rise and fall, we're watching him be managed, marketed, and ultimately controlled by someone who treated Elvis's career like a carnival attraction. As Parker puts it in the film, it was the greatest carnival attraction I'd ever seen. His superpower was music. So you could almost imagine like an eerie calliope music scene happening in the movie because it's a bit of a mad carnival. The film clocks in at 159 minutes, and it's certainly packed with details. So, like I said, it would have required quite an investment if I was to watch the movie. So I opted not to. But it's not that bad. So we move from Elvis' childhood to his breakout in the 50s, the backlash, the Vegas years, and his final burnout, all while wrestling with themes of fame, identity, and creative freedom. And I would say the movie does a halfway decent job of humanizing Elvis. It doesn't look that much at all of the controversies, but it really doesn't need to. There's a real tension between artistic expression and commercial exploitation here, which is probably one of the things you wouldn't expect the movie to highlight as much as it did. And that's kind of neat. I kind of like that it focused on an aspect of Elvis that people probably were not expecting. So by the end, you feel like Elvis is caught up in a gilded cage built by the very man you claim to set him free. Stylistically, this thing is a roller coaster. There are quick cuts, split screens, surreal transitions. It's Baz Luhrmann, or did I call him Blaz? I meant Baz Luhrmann doing what he does best. So think Natural Born Killers style stuff, but with more rhinestones. He even blends period accurate music with modern music, creating a kind of timeless energy that mirrors Elvis's lasting influence. So it's a little bit odd to hear this 50s rock music with sort of a trap beat going along with it, like with hip hop style music blending in. So, that kind of threw me off, I gotta admit. And I think the movie could have been better without that, but it wasn't a deal breaker, I'll just put it that way. It's just something that kind of made me wince a little bit because it's like they're trying to be a little bit too modern and hip for their own good. I think it would have been better as a little bit more of a period piece. But whatever, it was a stylistic choice, and I'm used to people making odd choices. So, what about the reception to the movie? Austin Butler earned serious praise. He even scored an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. Tom Hanks, though, not everyone was on board with his performance. Some critics found his accent distracting or his performance too cartoonish. I looked this up on Reddit, and some people did research on the accent of the real Mr. Parker, and they found that he actually didn't have that type of accent, at least according to the people who looked it up. I didn't really listen to the video myself, but yeah, apparently Tom Parker wasn't someone who had that sort of accent exactly. So he's definitely the Tom Hanks performance is definitely him playing against type. He's not as much of a nice guy in this role. In fact, he's actually sort of the villain of the piece. But they also kind of humanize him to an extent. So, they tried not to be one dimensional. And the film got 8 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, but it didn't take any of those statues home. Still, it did make waves. And say what you want, this movie, it feels like something. It's more of an experience than a lesson. And anytime you watch a movie and you remember scenes, that's a sign that's probably not the worst movie that you've ever seen. If you actually remember some parts of it, because really, in my opinion, what makes a movie the worst type of movie is just if you don't even remember anything from it. But this one, people are probably going to remember, some key moments from it. So, also worth noting, production was paused in March 2020 when Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson tested positive for COVID-19. That was actually one of the first major public cases of the pandemic, and it hit during filming in Australia. So, really, this movie is also a part of the COVID-19 history as one of the first signs that the pandemic was on its way on a global scale. So, there's a version of Elvis that could be vastly different from this one too. If you want to watch different depictions of Elvis on the screen, but this is a unique one, and I think it's memorable. And I would even rewatch it at some point, which I actually didn't know for sure I would think. I thought maybe I'd be like, "Oh, this movie sucks" or something like that, but no, it's actually surprisingly good. So the bottom line, Elvis is bold, theatrical, and completely unafraid to turn the king's story into a kind of fever dream. And it really does actually have some fever dream style moments. Like it's almost borderline horror story at some points, as weird as that probably sounds. Like you'll probably think I'm like BSing here, but especially with the full context of the story, like you've got the figure who's on the top, and then his life almost is rendered meaningless at a certain point because he just feels trapped and like he he's in his own unique hell, I guess you could say, at least as far as this movie's depiction is concerned. And for real life evidence of that, I mean, all you have to do is look at how Elvis wound up. I mean, people make fun of like the fat Elvis and the stuff like that, and how his legacy was fading toward the end. And to me, that's evidence that some of the aura or the mood of this movie is actually probably accurate. Like Elvis probably was undergoing some sort of breakdown, and he's probably being twisted and turned in every direction, and they were trying to milk his public image for all it was worth. Drawing every last dollar they could out of him in terms of merchandising, basically turning him into a Mickey Mouse type of figure. And you do get a sense that Elvis was aware of how that was cheapening his legacy and how he may have actually struggled with that. And, a lot of people, including myself, I've kind of picked on Elvis for mostly just being, somebody who covered other people's songs. But nevertheless, there are some impressive things about him. You know what I mean? It's it's uh it's a tough thing to really get into in specific detail, but he wasn't quite as bad as some people make him out to be, nor was he quite as good. I guess I'll just put it like that and let you figure out exactly what I'm trying to get at there. But this movie kind of demythologizes him while also sort of hanging on to the myth a little bit. So it's not always accurate, but it's emotionally true in a way that facts alone can't always deliver. It's less of a documentary and more of a sensory snapshot of a legend. And I guess that's all I have to say about it for now. So, what did you think if you've watched this movie? Was Baz Luhrmann's vision too much or just right for a performer as mythic as Elvis? So, until next time, I'm Wade, and this was Critical Wade Theory, or I suppose you might call it Real Talk. REEL Talk. So keep watching, keep questioning, and as always, don't be cruel.